Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So this is session 11 of the Sutta studies for Rains Retreat 2024. And this is I don't know if I can summarize the whole 11 sessions or 10 sessions or not, but at least to kind of round it out. So if you remember the original theme of the retreat, of the sessions, working through the challenges of spiritual practice. So basically, if people who have interest in spiritual practice are working on spiritual practice, they actually have two kinds of challenges. There is the usual everyday challenge of living your life in the world. You can say making a livelihood, social life, etc. And then there's the extra challenges of spiritual practice. So you got, got your work cut out for you. But of course, the benefits are are much more positive. In fact, the people who don't recognize the value of spiritual practice, most of them don't realize that all their problems rise from spiritual practice or lack of spiritual practice. All the suffering we have is a spiritual question, comes from a spiritual source. But for some people, it's just not on the radar, so to speak. Or some people, it's their ordinary life, so to speak, their worldly life, is so pressing, so dominant, so domineering in their life that they have no choice. I mean, how many people who are, on a poverty level have time to come on a retreat? Not mention the money. Remember in the old days in Switzerland, this group there, and they used to organize 10-day retreats quite frequently. In the very early days, there were a lot of people who had come back from India, so when they organized a retreat, of course they had to hire a facility, so they had to pay for it, and they had to also purchase food. You see, so they had to charge people for these retreats, but the cooks and the manager got to come free. So you had plenty of cooks and managers. People didn't have any money. But nowadays it's the other way around. They're really hard to find cooks and managers because everybody wants to be on retreat and pay for it. It's become a bit of a commodity now, retreats. And you work very hard at your life and in your business, and then you get stressed out, then you got to book a retreat to unwind. So a lot of people have the money, but they don't have the time to go on retreats. especially in Switzerland nowadays, with a very competitive society. So basically, the correct approach, I would say, the more reasonable approach, is to try to integrate spiritual practice into your ordinary life. The same also is the other way around, because many people are introduced to spiritual practice, especially in the West, through retreats. They do a retreat, which is a very artificial environment, as we all know. So some of you haven't done retreat yet, but you have to have somebody bring you the food, right? And you have to kind of work at trying to not speak. Takes a bit of effort. It is a bit of an artificial environment, though it can create a certain effect, which it kind of can be noticed like calmness of mind, and I don't know what you experience, but actually, too much food actually probably get overfed. But just being away from all of the social interaction, probably have more calmness of mind, maybe more clarity of mind too, because there's less input. It is based, most retreats are based upon sensory deprivation. You spend more time with your eyes closed in quiet environment and not engaging in a lot of activity or especially a lot of speaking. So not a lot of things to process, ideas to process. But as we all know, we can't stay on retreat forever. Like some people think that the monastery is an eternal retreat. They come and say, I want to, I come here and just sit in meditation all day long and just be a holy monk. Well, there's a chainsaws over there. There's a kitchen. There's a chainsaw. It's not quite what we imagined. So what I appreciated most about Ajahn Chah's approach was he was teaching spiritual practice as a way of life. Of course, he was a bit specialized because he was living in a monastery, and the people who came there were living the monastic life. So already there was a very specialized group of people. But he was pointing out that it's not all just about sitting quietly. In fact, he was quite a master of stirring things up. He would have, of course, there was a morning meditation and the evening meditation, but then there were periods of work in the daytime, sweeping leaves, and sometimes even major work projects going on. Yeah, but he would keep it changeable, so people didn't get too fixed in their routine. On one hand, the human beings are creatures of habit. So you can sort of depend upon that or kind of rely upon that to a certain degree. But the other side of it is that habits can be very, very dull, very dulling, and kind of they just kind of fix you in a certain routine. The sense of self hides behind habits and routine, you see. So sometimes being able to just shift out of especially our comfort zone, give us a new perspective. Just having a bit of change of perspective, for example. But if you get too much change of perspective, the human being is very agitated, very nervous, very suspicious, can't really process it. You have too much suffering then. So you got to find the right amount. So like that Ajahn Chah's monasteries, like I say, there was the regular routine, but then he would stir it up a bit too. One doesn't just fixed in the routine. So one got used to the changes, and sometimes it was very, very, I think I learned more with the changes than I did with the formal practice, actually. Of course, the formal practice gave a certain basis, gave a certain foundation, provided the kind of structure, and then from that, the changes you could observe. What goes on, like the first 3 days of a retreat, for example. Yeah, that's when if you're really mindful, you can observe, the sense of self, kind of what to do now. Don't do that. That's not retreat, Our old familiar habits are right there, and you just automatically want to jump into them. But no, stop. You're on retreat, right? You're meditating, right? And some people they're very programmed by the formalities, then they couldn't adapt when there was a change. When I was at Chitter's monastery one time, when I was a second monk there, who has to do the organizing of the place, you see. And we had no work projects on. It was June, I think. It was nice weather, no work projects. So I said, hey, why don't we just cancel the meetings for a couple of weeks? And we can have just a free time, no work projects, no evening, morning pujas, just have a free schedule. Within 3 days, everybody's kind of falling apart. Didn't know what to do with their time. And I recognized, okay, in that big monastery, there was a lot of people there. So, it was a lot of bumping into people all the time. And some of the people had to share rooms, so they were sharing a room, and one person wants to do the chanting, the other one wants to sit meditation in the same room. It's not going to work. So after about 5 days, I had to start the meetings again, just to give people a certain point of reference and some stability again. But each one of us has our own life to live, and like we heard the other day about, somebody asked a question about how to integrate the Eightfold Path into their life, daily life. And there's, some people, they would try and, they know what the Eightfold Path is, so they try and impose that upon their life. And many times it's not going to work. Just like people go on a retreat. I know people who came to retreats in Switzerland, and they got very inspired by the retreat. And when they left, they said, "Oh, when I go home, I'm going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and meditate." Yeah. So the first day, 4 o'clock. Second day, 4:30. Third day, 5 o'clock. I said, "You don't live in a monastery, I'm afraid. You got to live in your own house, and you have quite a different lifestyle than you do in the monastery, So, but rather look around in your life first of all. Take a good if you recognize the priority of spiritual practice, then look around in your life and see what will support spiritual practice. I've known some of the people who came to the monastery in Switzerland, and they really had a commitment to spiritual practice. Some of them even changed their jobs. Some reduced their work, so they had more time for spiritual practice, for formal spiritual practice. Some people had to, leave their friends. The friends were not supporting them in spiritual practice, so they had to change their friends. And but if that's the priority, spiritual practice is your priority in life, then you look around and what aspect of my life will support spiritual practice. You first have to know what the Eightfold Path is, what some of the basic Buddhist principles are, and then also reflect upon them occasionally, because we have a different perspective, different understanding of them. Like right view, for example. Right view, and then after a while you get some wisdom, some understanding, and right view is different. You have a different understanding of right view then. Or even mindfulness, right collectedness, for example, too. Once you experience some degree of collectedness, it's something. I have a different perspective now on it. I used to define samadhi as concentration. You see, concentration. That's what was really, what was the main thing that I appreciated. Concentration. My mind was so scattered, and it was in the past and the future, and so concentrate. But then after a while, I realized that was not a very helpful approach, especially when you think about insight meditation, because concentration is very narrow focus. Mindfulness is a broad focus. It's a broad awareness, observing the arising and the passing. Where samadhi is focusing on something permanent, something fixed. The constancy of the breath, for example. Keep focusing on it. And if you try to observe the rising and passing, then not so constant anymore. Unless you broaden out your perception, your understanding of samadhi. If it's collectedness, then you could be collected on a small object, the breathing, or you can broaden it out. Bring your awareness, your focus, your attention, not just on the breathing, but on the whole body moving, on the thoughts in the mind. It depends on how broad you want to make that focus then. So concentration doesn't work for me anymore, the word, but collectedness then is more relevant to me, especially with regards to insight meditation. And if there's enough enough calmness of mind, then the collectedness can be quite broad. If there's not much collectedness, you get destabilized by the too many things going on. Your field of awareness is too big. Narrow it again, back to the breath again. Open your mind up to, your awareness up to, attention up to more states of mind. If you realize you're getting a little bit caught up with them, back to the breathing again. Back to the breathing. So it depends on, what degree you want to call the collectedness. Very narrow or broader. Then it's more flexible. So if you've read the discourse I mentioned, number 2 in the middle length discourses, it's called the Sabha Asava, all the asavas. And the word asava is a little bit not used so often in the Pali Canon, and actually it probably was borrowed from one of the Indian traditions. The Buddha was, when he was in India at that time, there was quite a broad range of different approaches to spiritual practice. And there was a Brahmanic tradition, there were the Jains, there were the other different sects around. So the Buddha, sometimes he borrowed some of these different words, different particular definitions. Sometimes he changed them, sometimes he didn't. Like he borrowed the word karma or kama. That was very common in the Brahmanic tradition. Very, very ancient concept in Brahmanism. But it even changed over some years too. But the Buddha, it was very hard to get away from the word kama, action. Originally it meant the sacrifice that the Brahmins gave to the gods. That was your action, was to do a sacrifice, you see. Then it became chanting, and it became different spiritual practices. That was your action, spiritual action. And the Buddha comes along and he describes karma as intention. That really threw a spanner in the works. He shifted it from a thing, or a particular action, to a state of mind, intention. It's the intention behind the action which is most important. Yeah. You can do all these sacrifices you want, and if your mind is, in a confused place, or you're doing it for selfish reasons, then the result is not going to be very favorable. But if you make an action, similar action maybe, sacrifice, but with real focus and with a real positive intention of selfless act, I surrender to the God, or something, then very, very positive result. You can touch into selflessness then. As one of the Christian mystics said one time, God enters into me to the degree of empty of myself. I think it applies to all different religions then too, Except Buddhism doesn't have a God, but, the degree I surrender to the Dhamma, I empty of myself. So these asavas, I translate them as outflows because they mean something about a flow of some kind, either inside or outside. So I see them as the outflows of selfhood. Very, very basic, primary ones. Ignorance, sensual desire, and becoming. Or, you can say craving for existence, becoming bhava. And then there were probably these 3 basic ones, and then later was added views and opinions. I think because, when the Buddha began to teach in a wider range of situations, he met more different views. He met people from other religions who came along and tried to talk to him or tried to refute him sometimes. So he realized, wow, views is a really heavy stuff here. So it's a really basic thing of ego, having a view and defending it, you see. And in this discourse, the Buddha gives 7 different ways to deal with these outflows of selfhood. Yeah, if you remember, 7 different ways. seeing, restraint, using, enduring, avoiding, removing, and developing. So basically, he's pointing out a very, flexible approach. There's all these different of these particular asavas, these outflows. And they may require different approaches. For example, seeing is very universal, I would say. To be able to see what ignorance really is, what sensual desire really is, what is becoming, or bhava, what it really is. Yeah. And the most important development of seeing is called yoniso manasikara. That is attention to the source. Yoniso is a source. So the Buddha said there is things to attend to which are skillful, some things not so skillful to attend to. So what is skillful? What is not skillful to attend to? Different views about the self, right? You read that? Am I this or am I that? Or what am I? Well, what are you? But it's always I in it. Who am I? Who am I? Rather, if you just were to say, what am I? It would be a bit more closer to the truth. Huh? But his who am I already implies there's a who there, right? There's already somebody there. Huh? So you're never going to find the right answer. But what is skillful to attend to is the Four Noble Truths. There is unsatisfactoriness, there is a cause, there's a cessation, there is a path. And that will lead you to the end of suffering. But just thinking about yourself, trying to figure out who you are, will increase your suffering. Huh? Who am I? Let me see. I've been thinking about that since I was very young. and every day is different. Who am I today? Oh, I'm a bit irritable today. I'm Mr. Irritable. Oops. I assume so. Yeah. Good timing here. Yeah. So restraint especially useful for sensual desire. To restrain the senses, guard the senses, because the sensual desire arises through the senses. Restraint doesn't help too much for ignorance. You can say ignorance sometimes is already a type of restraint. It's already you're already ignoring. You're already refusing to look at reality as it really is. So it's getting more restraint is not going to be very helpful. But for sensual desire, it is very helpful. And then using. The using part was about especially addressed to monks, using the requisites wisely. Yeah, but we can say in general it's very simple living. So you have to live in the world. And basically, we have limited amount of energy and time. So where are you going to put your time and energy? Into accumulating possessions, into getting more clothes. You can spend your time on Saturdays going shopping, or come to the monastery, meditate. There really is have to I would say, be a little bit careful here, because sometimes people think, I shouldn't be doing that. They think, I got to live like a monk. Well, out there in the world, good luck. If you go around out there in the world just wearing this robe here, you might get arrested. I heard in Vancouver there are these monks who walk around. Well, these people who walk around with a monk's robe because they can get free food from the Asians, you see. And so they had police go around, and there was complaints about them. And they met these two Thai monks walking around. They were actually bona fide Thai monks, but of course they couldn't speak any English. So, and then they pulled out their monk's identity card, and it's in Thai, So, so I have my identity cards in English, fortunately, so I can show it to them. Yes, I'm a bona fide monk. And then, of course, enduring. I mean, the Buddha mentions this enduring because, the hardships, enduring the cold and the heat and the mosquitoes and all these kind of things, and harmful speech. I mean, many people, they learn meditation in, like I say, in a retreat. It's a very specialized environment. And then you can get very, what do you say? You can get very comfort orientated, you see. I can only meditate when it's 23 degrees and no mosquitoes biting me, and so I heard nowadays people who run these retreats, sometimes they say people now come from the city, and the retreat situation, these places, usually they're fairly basic, but people are complaining about all these things. The food's not good enough, I bet it's too hard, and I mean, why do you come here for? I come here for comfortable meditation, and I come to reduce my stress, not increase it. Like some Westerner came to the monastery with Ajahn Chah's monastery, and they said, Lampa, he said, Buddhism is about trying to reduce your suffering, right? Be free of suffering. But I come here to this monastery and I suffer more. Ajahn Chah said, this is the suffering to end suffering. See, you got to face it first. You got to see it first before you reduce it. But if you keep living in a comfortable environment, you don't have enough suffering. Although eventually it usually creeps up to you anyway. It usually catches up to you. Even your own soft bed at home, probably if you lay in it long enough, after a while it'll be hard. Yes. And of course, there is avoiding the dangers and bad friends, for example. And again, sometimes like I say, we have our own particular lifestyle, and usually it's that lifestyle supports our particular ego tendencies. You see, our habits and our particular tendencies. You probably don't go out and personally look for enemies, do you? You have friends around you to support you and say how wonderful you are, at least they don't challenge you. They don't threaten you, maybe, yeah. But there was, the Buddha did mention, especially about, we are social animals too, and how good friends, the Kalyanamitta, are very, very important. Having good friends around you who will support you in spiritual practice. And in a way, that's what the Sangha is. Sanghas. I mean, there's a great variety of people. If I look around at the monks I know, for example, in our community, I mean, most of them I would never think of as being a friend necessarily. Well, first of all, we come from different countries, but I mean, some are very, very different personalities. But within all those personalities, there is this aspiration to awakening, and so that's what we have to respect and appreciate. We're all have the same aspiration towards awakening. Even you have different, ideas, even how to practice it. I mean, fortunately in our community, it is sort of selective in a way, that for those who appreciate meditation, I mean, if some monk comes here who is not really a meditator, it's not going to fit in so well, is he? So much time for meditation and so much quiet space, and so we have had some monks who have come here, and they came from the city monastery, you see, and they found it very hard. They were mostly on the internet, I won't mention any names, fortunately. So sometimes you have to recognize, okay, one hand we say, oh yes, You should be, if you're a wise person, you should be able to adapt to everything, right? You should be able to, to accept everything, all the good and the bad, and whatever. But can you? Can you really, accept difficulties with equanimity? Yeah. I mean, sometimes it is helpful to be able to challenge yourself. That's what in our tradition we have this. Formerly, we have the tradition of what's called dutanga or tudong. So after living generally about 5 years in the monastery with a teacher, getting the kind of basics, and hopefully getting well established enough in the practice, then is encouraged to go off and wander, visit other teachers, go to other places. And it was quite a challenge sometimes to leave the comfort of the monastery, and leave my hut behind, and I can even leave my hard wooden floor behind, and go out and sleep in a rice field. It wasn't too hard for me because I was a traveler for many years in Europe and in Asia, so I slept in quite a few cornfields and olive orchards and vineyards and all kinds of things. So, but what was for me more challenging was just where am I gonna stay? And not being able to speak Thai very well at the beginning, and of course that was another big shock. People in the monastery were trained. Ajahn Chah trained the lay people very well to offer things properly and do the guppying the fruit and all this, and out in the countryside, people didn't have a clue. A lot of them, guppy fruit. What's that? What? Offer what? So it was a real you had to be much more self-reliant, and most of the time we couldn't even go stay in the local village temple either, because the village monks didn't know either. A lot of them, they didn't know what the refinement of the rules was. You see, and they didn't offer. Maybe they had different ways of offering things. They'd offer the whole table, for example, rather than each dish separately. And so anyway, I was a bit of a shock because I assumed every Thai person was well-trained Buddhist. And many times, especially in the Northeast, people are quite, so they say, addicted to lottery numbers. So walking around the countryside, and then they might make an offering, and then they say, how old are you? Well, first of all, they're quite blunt and say, do you have a good lottery number for me? I said, no, we don't do that. So, how old are you then? How many brothers and sisters do you have? What's your mother's age? And there was one of the monks was wandering around. He was a Westerner also, but wandering around, and then I heard another monk just came past here, a couple of weeks ago, and he gave really good lottery numbers. And I met him later, and I told him that, and he says, "What? I deliberately didn't give any lottery numbers." Even you say nothing, it's a zero. So, I don't know. Is there? Oh, I never did it myself. If I was so good at it, I would have done it myself. Be a millionaire myself. So removing, removing the different, disturbing thoughts. This is helpful, of course, for sensual desire and for becoming. Thinking of, becoming is, you could say, craving for existence. So, removing thoughts about yourself. As I mentioned, I didn't mention it one of the times about just being aware of how many times the thought of I arises. I see, I think this, I think that. Just try and stay with the direct experience. thinking. Don't allow your mind to go into I am thinking or I'm seeing. Just see, think, smell, taste, touch. Just be with the direct experience and try and remove the sense, the I that comes into it, creeps into it, which is all extra. Yeah? There is the seeing, and then afterwards, a little voice, right? Oh, I'm seeing, and I like what I see, and I want what I see, and I, and then that was just seeing, wasn't it? And actually, are you seeing clearly? No. And then, of course, developing, that's, I think we all know this one too, developing the factors of awakening, skillful qualities. So you can say this is the developing part. Bhavana is bhavana. This is a word for meditation in Buddhism. Bhavana, developing these positive states of mind, which they're all latent within us. We all have these qualities within us, but how many of us really develop them? How many develop much collectedness or clarity or energy or investigation of Dhamma, Joy. How many of us can develop joy? So many people go around with the, weighed down by life, and they, this is the first day of your life, Are you going to carry a frown around with you or a smile? It's up to you. Well, it's up to you. You make your choice, Everybody else is frowning, but you have to follow them, to imitate. I want to be liked too, but you copy everybody else frowning, but what's that saying, Smile and the world smiles with you, cry and you cry alone or something. So we find that, these different times of our life, different situations require different approaches. I know some people, all they know about is just sitting meditation. So, there was somebody, a couple of people I know in Europe, and they're really kind of meditation addicts. And one of them, one person I know, they're very good at it. They're good at samadhi or collectedness, you see. She can sit there for 4 or 5 hours. But her ordinary life is quite a disaster. Her family life is really, she runs to the monastery and they can sit there 4 hours, feel very calm, and she goes home and so this is what the Ajahn Chah is trying to point out, is to try to bring these two together, your ordinary life and meditation and spiritual practice. So your life becomes a spiritual life. Like some people, they think of, I guess they still think today that, spiritual is something separate. There is your ordinary life, your physical life and your mental, emotional life, and then there is, on Sunday afternoon, you go to the church or something, or morning, isn't it? I forgot. Even we go to the temple in the morning to feed the monks, right? Yes. All happens in the morning, I guess. Yeah. So you just think, one day a week, and in the Thai language it's called one pra, noble day, pra day. Other 6 days are one kon, ordinary day, the person day. But actually, we have spiritual. I define spiritual as complete. Everything's based upon what we so-called the spiritual. In our life, our whole life is potentially spiritual. Because we have to deal with the physical and the mental, emotional, and hopefully we recognize the value of the spiritual so we can integrate them all. Just like the Buddha was teaching about mindfulness, for example, Buddha didn't talk about mindfulness only for the spirit. Where does mindfulness start? The body. Be aware of the body. Be aware of feelings. Be aware of states of mind. Yeah. So this is this quality, this spiritual quality of mindfulness, it now integrates into the body, feelings, states of mind. So it becomes our life becomes more complete now. It is body, mind, spirit, all together. By being able to recognize the value of that, then, you can live with the body and the mind much more peacefully. It's a matter of trying to put it into practice and, trying to bring these spiritual qualities into our life, and then, we can live in the world. You say we live in the world with much more freedom from suffering. Say in the world, but say not of the world. Yeah. But it takes there's a potential there, but it takes some effort to apply it. And Buddha just gives us this potential, but it's up to us to do the work. Yeah. So now the kind of retreat comes to the end, of course, formally speaking, but the practice continues for endless. So, okay.
ขันธรรมยังขันธรรมยังธรรมปทาสาธุพลังพนามาเสสาธุสาธุสาธุอา